Shut up and sit down.
Hey everybody, this is Tony Day. I'm going to be doing a discussion with Dan. Let me switch over to him. There's Dan. Hi, Dan.
Hello.
What we're going to be doing is we're going to be responding to a video that was posted. It was supposed to be talking about the truth about 4K and HD and how 4K failed and all this stuff. It was by... And I'll say his name because I'm not sure if it's like I'm allowed to or not, and I can change it later if I have to, but it's by Tony Northrup. He's a very well-known YouTuber in the photography world. And it kind of bugged me because I felt like there was some things that were not fully being discussed that need to be discussed about higher resolution and how it really is helpful for most people who are going to get involved in video production and a lot of other things that are with imaging. So I brought on Dan. He's an imaging expert in digital media. So Dan, do you want to just tell us your experience?
Sure. I have over 10 years of experience working in the television and film area. I used to work in the news studios. I also worked in visual effects for a number of years. I also worked as I worked in design for board games, and currently I work in educational technology capacity for, I design interactives, I do animations, I shoot film, and work in various media for a educational technology company. So that's what I'm currently doing now, but I have a lot of experience doing a lot of different things. I also have clients outside of my regular day-to-day science videos. I work with a design company doing animations in hospitality to design, and there's kind of a lot of stuff that I do, so it's kind of hard to list it all.
Yeah, I was kind of interrupting you because I wanted you to talk about that, because that's where I think you have some really amazing stuff, and I think I edited in where we could see some of the work you did. And I think that you're a perfect person to bring on with this kind of discussion because you have so much experience in various capacities. And I think that broad perspective is the kind of perspective that we need to have if we're going to have a serious discussion about, higher resolution and whether or not that makes sense for a number of different products that you might be making. So, cool. So, first, I kind of want to just talk about the video, and I know, like, talking to you about it, I was hearing your reactions while watching the video. It was very interesting, because you had the same kind of reactions that I was. It just, there was a lot of things that were going on that were very silly, and I think we need to kind of address right off the bat. The first thing is I don't think it's really a truth, the truth about 4K and HD at all, or that 4K failed or whatever. My opinion is that it is a very tunneled vision scope of what you can do with higher resolution. So what did you think about that? Do you agree?
Yeah, this gentleman, whatever his name was, and I don't have anything against the guy or whatever. It's just the way that let's be frank with this. A lot of people put clickbait titles for their videos because it's one way to garner views. If somebody's going to give you the absolute truth based on the title there, that you're going to learn about the truths about 4K and 1080p or whatever, more people are going to click on it. So that aside, the way that some of this was presented, it was a little bit odd to me because there were a lot of kind of assumptions made where he was talking about how, and I only watched this video once, so you'll forgive me if I'm going to paraphrase some things, but it seemed to me like he was kind of going from a very narrow area and then making it broad. So he's kind of talking about his group and how they do YouTube videos and all that, and how most people view it on a phone. So therefore, really, you're only getting proper 720 resolution when you're viewing it on your phone, right? And then it kind of gets extrapolated to where he's talking about how if you're doing film or if you're doing stuff in a professional capacity in these other areas, how it kind of makes how good 1080p is when you film it in that versus the 4K, that really you should just be doing 1080p because you don't see much of a difference in the quality. And he also talks about, he lists the size of files, how they're different, which is true. And how when you edit certain things, it might be slower, and then when you render, and all of these other things that go along with higher resolution formats or formats which have a lot more information stored within them. But I felt it was a little bit misleading because there are a ton of reasons why you would use 4K, and many of them don't even have to do with actually presenting that footage in 4K.
Yeah, and that's what I really want to touch on, is that I felt like that part of using higher resolution is completely lost in the video, because there's an example that you talked to me about, which is if you're designing a stamp, a stamp, this isn't a stamp, but something like this size, you're not going to do that design on something that's that tiny. That's not the canvas that you're going to use. You're going to use a larger canvas so that you can get all the details and get everything in there, and then you're going to squeeze that down in the final render.
Absolutely.
The way that he presents it is that if you were to design a stamp, just do it in that original size, and there's no difference. But there is a difference. The amount of utility you get, the higher details, like that's one thing, but right. It's not just that. When it comes to video production, and you can have a higher resolution to start with, it means you have a lot more room to go in and make adjustments to cropping the video to suit your needs. And if you've ever worked in post-production as an editor, as a colorist, in anything that has to do with post-production on a movie, on a video, on any of that, chances are you have had to crop and reframe many, many shots. And I know that in my experience, just about everything I've done required some kind of adjustments. You can, it's I'm not going to say limitless, because there is a limit, but having that higher resolution allows you to get that, you can get even up to a second camera angle from just one shot for interviews. You can do like a fake shaky cam, which can really help out in a lot of ways. If you have a camera that has really bad rolling shutter and like just can't deal with it when it's being handheld and moving all over the place, doing a fake handheld shot will get you the same kind of effect without having to deal with those issues. Which some people don't even know about. Or you can stabilize images in post without really losing resolution, perceptible resolution, when you have that downsample to HD in the final render. So those are just a couple examples of that. And I think he kind of says that he thought he was going to do that, but then he didn't. But that doesn't mean it's not useful for anybody.
Oh, sure. And I would argue that he would have benefited from using some of those techniques that you were talking about. It's a standard known technique in illustration. Like if you did illustration, let's say in the 1980s, okay, for playing cards or for illustrations in a book or something like that, you're going to be doing your painting or your illustration or whatever it's going to be. You're going to be doing this on a larger format. You're going to take a canvas or a large illustration board, and you're going to make it much larger. And then when you get it scanned, or when you would take a photograph of it, or whatever method the artist would use to capture that image, and then in their time digitize it or whatever it is to get that image onto a card, it would then be scaled down, because what you're getting is a lot more detail than you could possibly do on a very small piece, like you said, the stamp, for example. Then you would you would get that detail on a larger piece, and then you squeeze that down so it looks really tight and really nice. And that technique goes all the way through to today, especially in visual effects and doing digital illustrations and things like that. I would not recommend that an artist would ever even digitally render their image at exactly the size that they're going to print, because you can get much more detail by making it larger and then squeezing it down. All of your pencil lines, everything will look much tighter.
Well, how about this now? Maybe I'm not sure if you've ever had to do this, but I can imagine that it might occur at some point. Let's say you're doing an illustration for a company, and let's say it's a piece that's this size, and they say, you know what, we want to just use this section of the piece for a banner or for something else. We want to crop out all the rest of it, and we want to put that, like, let's say it's a little character or something like that. They want to use that for something else. If you did the whole project in that native resolution, right? That, let's say it just the final render ended up being 2 megapixels, and you did the whole thing in only 2 megapixels. Wouldn't that make it pretty hard to then retroactively try to expand that image of the crop later?
It's a general practice when you're shooting for film that you don't get your framing 100% accurate. You're going to be shooting with, more headroom. You might even see a boom mic overhead sometimes. You and I have had the, fortunate experience to work in visual effects with film, where you can see how they've added a crop over the plate. So for those of you who don't know anything about this, or, you're not really that learned in, visual effects and all that, there's usually a plate that has like all of a lot more information. And then when you go to the theater and you see it, in that cinemascope, or you see it in the widescreen, there's a lot of information that's been cropped out. And many times they'll actually blow up the image, they'll scale it up or whatever it is, they'll crop that section. And so if, let's say you shot, let's say 10 takes, whatever it is, of Russell Crowe at a wide, and you shot it on something that had higher than a 4K resolution, you could punch in. That's funny. That's funny because I remember we worked on. Can I say the movie? We worked on Man of Steel, and they literally were doing that. Right.
In Man of Steel, there were shots that we ended up having to completely redo, where they took the shot and then they were like cropping it around and doing all these different things with it.
You do what's called pan and scan, where you'll punch in on something and then move over here, and you'll change sort of like the composition of the shot, even though you shot it at a wide or a medium or even a close-up. If you want to get really, really close in there, they can do that if you shoot it on that higher resolution or that larger. I guess you could do that with film stock. I'm more knowledgeable in the digital aspects of things, but if you shoot on a 4K or a 6K or an 8K camera, you just get more detail that you can punch in on. Yeah. And a lot of times the grain sometimes is visible. You'll see in old films from the 70s and the 80s, when they do a post zoom, you can see all that film grain because they blew up that image more than what they really had the resolution to do that. And it's like fairly obvious that they did it. But nowadays, you shoot it at that higher resolution, you can do that and it's less noticeable. It's kind of like how you can change the frame rate on stuff. If you do a post slowdown, right, but you didn't shoot it on a fast enough frame rate, then it's going to look jittery because you didn't have that extra frame rate to help you with your slow motion shot. So I mean, not to abstract it too much, but that's the benefit of shooting things and rendering things at a much higher resolution, not just in your digital film work, but when you're making things that are like icons for your film project. If you have banners or whatever it is, you want to do it at a larger scale and then bring it down, because you never know if you might want to blow it up a little bit or change where it is or scale it or whatever it is.
That's right, and I can tell you from my experience, I do tons of videos every year. I think we did over 200 videos last year. That having that extra resolution on those different kinds of banners or on lower thirds and all those different things, that if you're especially if you end up working in different resolutions, sometimes you have a 720p capture, sometimes you have 1080p capture, sometimes they'll want it to be a 1080p render or a 720p render or whatever. You can, having the flexibility to go back and forth between them makes it a lot easier to know that you don't have to worry about having to go back into the file, have to blow everything up and re-render everything. Sometimes you use especially if you're having to use After Effects to build some of this stuff, you'll end up using something that has a rasterized image. It's not going to be something that you can just easily expand and contract without having any issues. So knowing that and starting with that higher resolution and knowing you could just down res it makes it so much easier to produce content. It makes it where there's not a feedback loop having to go back and forth between you and your graphics department.
Right.
So,
and that is particularly why whenever I create visual effects packages, or if I'm going to create and deliver any sort of iconography, like a logo or a spinning 3D bug, or anything like that, I usually would deliver it at multiple resolutions and a lossy and a lossless format, because if they're going to use it on a website, you only need it to be 720 DPI, and you only need it to be a JPEG or a PNG that's that small. You don't need some sort of like giant EXR file that is going to be 42,000 kilobytes or whatever it is. You don't need that kind of stuff. But then they also have a 4K version of the video, or a large scale for print, which would be at 300 DPI, so that they can print this if they ever needed to. And they also have different versions, 150 in case they needed it for some sort of smaller print, that sort of thing. So when you do your deliverables, it also helps you with retaining clients, because you're able to provide them with more than just a specific type of thing for, let's say, their website, but they don't have something for print. And then they'll end up printing their logo using this really low resolution image and go like, why is this pixelated?
That's right.
Often.
That's right, and I wanted to add on that because for me it's the same thing with video production. It makes more sense if you work with clients and you're doing freelance work, having the delivery. If you're working with a client and they were working with people before that would only give them a 720p render or only an HD render, if you can provide them with a 4K and an HD render, even if they never use that 4K render, they'll think that that's amazing, and they'll say, hey, we can have a backup, just in case if for some reason someone asks us to have this same video put up in 4K, we have that ready. Like you can do that too. You can even add that on as a little feature. You say, pay me, X amount of extra dollars, and you can have both renders, and it's off no real work. Like you don't really have to do anything in order to make that render possible. So I want to move on a little because we have a lot to talk about. I want to talk about how the video we're talking about could have used some of the things we're talking about by shooting it in 4K and doing techniques around using higher resolution to make the product better. And I have a couple ideas. The first thing is, in my opinion, the entirety of that video has distractions that occur continuously.
Here's my thing, and I'm not a camera junkie like you are, so you'll have to forgive me on some of the things. I know how to.
I'm not a junkie. I just know things. I just know things. You research a lot of very, very detailed aspects of a lot of this stuff, especially with cameras, and I think that's one of the main reasons, if not the main reason, why people come to your channel, and you do such a thorough job of explaining that. Here's my take on the whole thing. If you're trying to teach people or explain to people or share your knowledge in filmmaking, cinematography, photography, videography, whatever it is, the main thing that I expect, if you're trying to use the camera itself as a way of teaching or explaining it, is that your main point of focus has to be in focus. That's the number one thing that I expect. Now, obviously, what we're doing right now with this back and forth is, just a discussion. So, Yeah,
I'm not going to tell you.
the value of this, just so I can piggyback. The value of this video is not in showing you how great the autofocus is on a camera or how to do a live broadcast or whatever. This is just a discussion. The value of
Right.
it is listening to what we're saying. If
Right.
I was trying to tell you how great the sharpness is of a lens and I did it this way and never showed you an example of that, that would be very silly. But we're just talking about the general things that you can do, and these are things you can do at home with your own experiments. And this is just our knowledge that we're trying to give you, so to help you understand more about higher resolution and how it can actually benefit you.
Yeah.
So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, basically what I'm saying is, when somebody is trying to present information to me and try to teach me something, and all that, with like, especially with video, your main point of focus, it should be in focus. Like, and when, like, right off the bat, I can tell, I was like, oh, like the background is vibrating, like what's going on. And very quickly you could tell that he was using an autofocus. Now, I'm not one of these people who are going to be like, oh, pro or against or whatever. I'm just saying what I see. And if you're trying to say, don't use a specific type of format to do this punch in, pull out, wide shot to medium, and you do it in one shot, and then you edit it, editing, when you edit, you cut between those compositions. But when you're trying to explain it to me, you're doing this walk and talk that is very out of focus at times and very distracting.
Mhm.
You're not really making a good case for yourself. And I think that he would benefit by taking some of those ideas that are tried and true and using that in the way that he's explaining how to shoot, and use it and showing us. Like, if he shot it in 1080p and showed how you could do a wide shot that you could punch in and it looks really good without needing 4K, that's one thing. But that's not what he was trying to show.
That isn't what he showed
And
at all.
then on top of that, the way that it's, how the shot is composed, if there was a thought to the composition to begin with, he's completely up here. And for those of you who don't really know how to do, like, frame up a shot and stuff like that, or like if you look at artwork and analyze it, there's all sorts of things that can help you. There's golden mean, there's golden triangles, there's thirds, Fibonacci ratios. There's all sorts of things that you can use to help you in creating a nice composition. And if you're shooting like footage and you're by yourself, or you're one videographer with one person, you're not really sure how you're going to end up cutting it, shooting it at a wide with a higher with a larger format will help you make that composition better, because you could even do punch ins for over the shoulder. You could to have
That's
an image
exactly
here or something
right.
like that. There's all sorts of things that you can do if you were to shoot with that in mind.
That's exactly right. And that's how I shoot my interviews. When I'm doing like a one camera interview with someone, I'm able to do that, and I can, you could even have it where someone's in the center and then you can cut in and do an over the shoulder with the same camera. That's how resolution can really help you in those situations. So what Dan's saying is 100% accurate.
Another thing that he sort of was discussing when it came to the type of camera he was using, the depth of field and stuff like that, he was talking about how, kind of like, he was alluding to how cinematic the shot looked, because he was in focus in the foreground and the background was blurry, and this sort of setup helps you make a more, I guess he's trying to say, it's a more dynamic and more professional looking image. And I'm going to tell you guys, if you don't know this, shallow depth of field doesn't add necessarily anything to your shot if it has no meaning, if there's no reason for it being there. And a lot of times in Hollywood, they will shoot with everything in focus and then do a roto outline of a foreground character and blur the background if that's what they wanted to do. So again, the idea of shooting in a way where you're, what in VFX often is called baking in. So it's like you're taking an effect and you're making it to where it will always be on that image and you can never remove it. You're baking in this depth of field in which, if you are partially out of focus because of this autofocus thing, instead of using a really wide, what is it called? Wide focus.
You mean a wide angle? Or
Yeah,
you mean if you have a deeper depth of field, there's you got
right.
shallower and
You,
then it's deeper, you
right,
got
right. You
more
have
stuff
this.
in
If you
focus.
get a deeper depth of field where more things are in focus, and then later you just make a quick roto of yourself or whoever it is, and then you blur the edges. Obviously, you have to know how to do that. Make a clean plate that, and remove the character from the background. If you know how to do that, that would even look better because you have the control of what that's
Yeah.
going to look like in post.
Well,
And in the
okay.
professional world, when you're shooting a film, the reason why they have focus pullers is because automatic focusing doesn't really work that well when you have hands flying out in front of the camera and all this other stuff going on. That's why they use focus pullers, is because you need that in order for it to work, at least to have it look good and not be vibrating with the background and things like that.
Yeah, I just want to touch on that. Autofocus, especially if you're talking about doing visual effects. Obviously, you know more about that visual effects side of getting the blurred background, and all that. I don't do that because that's a lot of work that I'm not willing to do. But what I do know is that first of all, a majority of what makes something look cinematic is not necessarily a soft background. It's not really that. What it is intentional lighting, controlled lighting, not like what you see in this shot. Okay, this is not cinematic in any way. Okay, even if I had it like where the background was blurred, it wouldn't look great because the lighting doesn't look good. It would be very flat on my face and all that. So it's not depth of field that makes something really look cinematic. And I have a video where I talk about this. What he was doing in that video, like extreme like that, you're trying to draw attention to a very specific thing. Usually it might be an eyeball with like a little tear rolling down. It might be in a situation where I watched Moonlight for the first time, where there's a scene where the two boys are on the beach, and there's a soft background. But those are not my favorite shots in the movie. My favorite shots are a lot of the environments that they're in, the apartments and all that, where you can really see how people live in this movie, and it really makes it feel real. If those shots were just shallow depth of field, it would be kind of boring, and it wouldn't really tell the whole story of what's going on. And it's lighting, it's set design, it's the color palette that you're using, it's the composition and the movement. It's all of those things combined. And that's what really frustrated me as far as like I'm not even like, I don't even consider myself as someone who's like a cinematography snob in any way. Like, I just want it to look good. Like, I just want to be entertained when I'm watching something and really feel what the characters are feeling in it. And when the camera gets in the way, it distracts me, and I get annoyed by that. And when he's saying, "Oh, look, I made something that looks like a Hollywood movie because I have a soft background," when the focus is going all over the place, going from like his beard hair to his eyeball to his, I think he was wearing a hat or whatever, but going up here to his hands and all that, it's like, dude, that's not the soft background isn't what makes something look
Right.
high quality. That is not what it is. It's all of the other things. Yes, in certain situations, having that really like shallow depth of field to really get your eye drawn to a moment with a character, yes, obviously that is a good use of that. But the vast majority of really, really good cinematography is not that. That's such an easy thing to do compared to how hard it is to really decorate a set. Get a good set designer to really make things look good, and a good set decorator. Hi, honey.
Sorry.
Hi. Okay. The shallow depth of field thing, just the shallow depth of field thing. It's all of those other things. Getting a good set decorator, getting someone who knows what they're doing with lighting and really painting with the light to make it look dynamic and make it look the way you want.
I'll give the viewers an example. And if you haven't seen this movie, you really should, because it's a really great film. It's called Chinatown. And there's a part in the film where Jack Nicholson is following around a person. He plays a private eye. He's following around this lady. And it's this boat scene where they're on this little pond, little lake, and they're in these little rowboats. And he's supposed to be taking some photography of this gal. And in that scene, everything is in perfect focus. Because, and if you want to really like get into the mindset of like, oh, this is like language of cinema and all this, Jack Nicholson's character, is taking in the entire scene around him, and he is focusing on shooting this photo of this lady and seeing everything that's happening in this particular moment. And if you were to shoot this with a shallow depth of field, it would have a completely different meaning. And you would be like, well, why, that you can't see what's going on outside of these two characters. Are they intimate? It starts to question that. So just take a look at that scene and you can see how powerful that can be.
Yeah. I said I always do this challenge with people, where if you really do believe that it's a shallow depth of field that makes it like that, getting that really shallow, like f1.2 with a 50 millimeter lens, if you really think that that's what it is, go watch your favorite movies. Okay, go watch your favorite movies. Mine, probably my top favorite movie. I every time I think Braveheart, can't help it. I love that movie. I'll watch it any day of the week. And when I think of that movie, I don't think of shallow depth of field shots. I think of those big battlefield shots that they use. I like a bunch of images are going through my head that I'm like, man, if they shot that at f1.2, it would have been impossible to get the shot. And that's why a lot of times in cinema, you got to stop that thing down to like 5.6 f8. Because you want to get the shot. Like if you have an action scene or you have, things going on with actors and all this stuff, you want to get it in focus at least. And imagine if you're a focus puller having to, pull at f1.2. Especially on a large format, because full frame, because I think he was using the Canon RF or whatever. Like full frame, 135 stills is bigger than a Super 35, and maintaining focus with such a shallow depth of field like that would be a GD nightmare. So I remember shooting at like 2.8 and f4 when I was in school, trying to keep things in focus with those Canons when you first could shoot like HD and it was like the biggest thing. It's hard. There's nothing easy about it, and I can't imagine. Look how hard the autofocus, like the autofocus couldn't keep up.
Right.
And those have like eye tracking and all this other kinds of stuff. Imagine that. Like you got like a, wafer thin. I was going to show an example, but I don't have anything right now. Like, wafer thin, tiny little depth of field, and you're going to try to keep that in focus.
Right.
Anyway, let's move on from that. What I want to talk about next is how 4K resolution actually can provide you with better information by providing more information for doing certain things. So one of those is when you're doing compositing. If you're doing compositing, and I've had, numerous discussions with people about this that do this for a living. I used to do a lot of background removal, and I worked at a visual effects company. You worked at a visual effects company. When you have the choice between 4K and HD to do a background removal, which one are you going to pick? Are you going to pick 4K? Are you going to pick HD? Or is there no difference?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think
I'm asking you. I have the answer, but I'm asking you.
The answer basically is when you're doing anything that involves compositing, where whatever the footage is, whether you're removing something off of it, if you're adding something to it, you're changing something, you're doing different color grading, whatever it is, you really want to have the most information possible. And on a 4K, you get more information just naturally, and then the type of format will also give you more. Now, more about film codecs and stuff like that. For me, it's, working with what's called 32-bit float EXRs or 16-bit float EXRs. There's also now 64-bit EXRs, which have multi-channels for all different stuff that you can hold on them. and they're very large files. But when you're doing compositing and when you're making a shot, I remember when I was working on The Amazing Spider-Man, there was one shot that had, I think it was 8 different vendors with, I think there were 18 different visual effects elements, plus the background replacement and the live action footage.
Well, I remember going through on that. I think it was that project and a few of the other ones, some of the Disney projects, where you would open up the Nuke script and it would just be birds' nests, of different effects everywhere.
And so, like, I think that for anybody who's viewing this who doesn't know anything about this, you have to kind of like understand that when you're working in the in quote professional world of AAA films and stuff like that, a lot of times you might be working with a bunch of different vendors, not just the people shooting the film, but the people who are doing the visual effects or the background replacements or fixes on the face or whatever it might be. And all of those things have to mesh together. Well, how do you get those things to mesh together if you give a file that doesn't have as much information as possible so that they can color grade everything the same and all that? Of course, there's things that help, like lookup tables and things like that. But in general, when you composite all of these elements together, you need to have a lot of that information available so that you can make it seamless, and you can add things like light wraps and erode edges and things like that. There's a lot of information that's really important for people to make the shot work. And by shooting in a way where you have more information, it just helps you to be able to either color grade it or composite it or change things about that footage in an easier way. And the easiest example that I can give anybody is you just got to look at a lossy versus a lossless format. Lossy meaning that you're losing information, and lossless meaning that there's a lot more information there that you can change the gradation from a high key shot to a low key shot. You can change the contrast. You can take the white values and pop them out without things being grayed out or anything like that. And anybody who is totally lost, just look at what the difference, look up the definitions and examples of what a lossless versus a lossy format looks like.
Well, right, but I mean, I get that, and I just want to make sure that I bring it home for people who are at the video production side that maybe got a little lost there. I'll make it very simple for you. If you're working on a project and you have the choice between, and you're going to be doing background removal, you're doing green screen or whatever, if you have the choice between HD or 4K, you choose 4K.
Right.
If you have the choice between 4K and 6K, and you can afford it, you go 6K.
Right.
Okay? And the reason, and this is assuming all things are equal, using the same codec, all that, because there's a debate. There's actually a debate that people have between whether or not 10-bit 422 codecs in HD provide better information or not compared to 4K 8-bit 420. Okay? So I'm assuming that if you're watching this, you understand what I mean. Okay? An 8-bit 420 codec is what most of the cameras that people have nowadays have. It's usually a finishing codec. And then you've got your 10-bit 422 files that are usually ProRes and DNx HD. Now there's DNx HR. And I guess there's other ones that now have like a 10-bit kind of way of doing it. But if you have, it's weird that there's a debate whether or not a 10-bit file in HD should be used for green screen removal or background removal versus 4K 8-bit 420. That should tell you a very important thing, that higher resolution, especially if you have the choice between, if it's the same codec, if it's like ProRes HQ versus ProRes HQ, one's HD, one's 4K, and you're doing any kind of compositing, the 4K one is the one you go with, because it is a lot cheaper and a lot easier for everybody if you have enough information to remove that background then to reshoot it because somebody messed up, like they got like a little bit of the lighting wrong, so you didn't have enough information to do what you needed to do to pull it, or you have to go in and create rotos to try to deal with it. That's the worst. Okay? I mean, imagine if it's like, I've got a green screen behind me and I've got this little thing that I got to roto out. Imagine that. And if you just shot in the higher resolution where there is more information in the colors, there's more information in color, there's more information in everything. You go with that because that will give you what you need to do the job. Now, just one last thing. This also has to do with color grading. When you're doing color grading, if you're going to do a lot of color grading, meaning you're going to grab, skin tones and just try to grab those with a tool and just change those, and you want to, take the greens or the yellows and you want to bend them this way and that way, the higher resolution image will give you more color information with the codecs being equal than the HD image. It does. It's a fact. Okay? There's more of a gradient because there's more pixels, there's more stuff. Okay? So because of that, if you want to have more freedom to do your color grading, to do your background removal, to do your visual effects work, whatever it is you want to do with your project, you shoot in the higher resolution. It's that simple of a process. And I don't think that it's that debatable. What do you think?
I agree. It's basically the same thing as I was kind of saying before. You always want more information if you're ever going to alter an image. You do not want to have a reduction of whatever the information is that's sent to you, especially if you're a person who's editing or color grading or compositing something where you have to use that information and change stuff on that actual image. You do not want something that's been like down-resed as what you're getting. You always, the higher the resolution, the more information you have, the better. And for you guys in film who actually shoot this stuff on cameras, I'm used to rendering things out of CGI programs. So the kind of things that we work with are very, very different. You'll have 32-bit float and integer values and all this other stuff. The easiest thing to compare on what the versatility is in different formats is take a higher resolution, higher detailed file, and then a lower one, and apply a simple glow filter on that and see what the range is that you can get out of a glow filter add-on to that. And I'll tell you, at least from the CGI world, doing a glow effect in post makes your image look, like 20%, 30% better. So you always do it. And if you already bake out those float numbers, which is the more information that's stored in your file, you're not going to be able to control the glow as much, and you'll blow out your image because you can't get the little detail fine points of those white values to bring out the glow value, and you're just going to have to use what you got. So anytime you can get higher detail, higher resolution, and you're going to do stuff to it, I always recommend that that's what you want. Now, your final deliverable can be whatever you want to deliver it in, but when you're working on files and you're making your video or your image or your shot or whatever it is, you always want the highest detail you can get. It doesn't mean you're working on a file that's the highest detail, because a lot of people work in proxy, but you want to be able to use the values to create that image.
Yeah, and also, just to again piggyback, this is all in effort to get like a final in HD, not to just get a final in 4K. So this is all an effort to get a good HD file.
If my final animation or image is going to be delivered in 4K, I will be rendering at 6 or 8K. That's the standard.
Yeah, and I've said when people ask me about the Blackmagic Pocket 4K or the 6K, I say, are you doing HD as your final, or are you doing 4K as your final?
Right.
If you're doing 4K, if your idea is, I want to create 4K final products, you get the 6K. If you're going to be doing HD, you get the 4K. My opinion is that 4K is made for an HD final, or 2K finals.
Yep.
Higher resolution than that, 6K cameras, the 8K cameras, that's what you want for your 4K. So I want to also we're gonna wrap this up at the end by talking about where he's right about when you like 4K is not really that necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically have like 3 different tiers of products that people make. And it's not that there's, one thing is more important than the other or anything like that. I'll just kind of go over it so that people understand. The first one is what everyone's done, which is the mom and pops or yourself or whoever it is that want to just shoot little videos or take pictures or whatever it is of your friends and your family and your dog and your cat and your gerbil or whatever. Okay, that is one kind of product that people make, and the value of it is not in the distribution of that really to a bunch of different people. I mean, some things go viral, yeah, but I mean, do people really care about the video of your cat sleeping? Not really. Okay, so it's that little thing, that little moment, that makes that kind of video valuable. Okay, and what's weird is that now there's there are companies that make money by taking those uploads of people's cat videos and dog videos and making a mix of those, and they make money by putting that on Facebook, which is really weird.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's not the production value of it that sells it. It's that it's just a cat or a dog doing a funny thing. Okay,
Right.
So that's one. The second one is your broadcast news, your on the ground news gathering kinds of people, documentaries where you really need to get in there. You might need to have like a really long recording, or you need to go guerrilla style with a cell phone or with a point and shoot camera, and you need to get it in any way you can. That kind of thing. Quick broadcast news is the best way to explain it, because in broadcast news, and I know because I did editing for broadcast, you get the footage and you need to edit it as quickly as possible and get it out there. You don't really have time to do a lot of color correcting or anything like that. The important thing is they get you the footage, you do a bunch of stuff real fast, and you get it out. That's all that really matters. And in those kinds of situations where you really can't afford for those few extra minutes that it might take to do a 4K render, or that for your computer to catch up, or you're not really going to ever use that extra resolution or extra quality of the image to really get that video where you need it. Those are the kinds of situations where I can understand you don't need to shoot in 4K, because it's not going to be necessary. Okay, it's just you're not going to have that extended production pipeline to really do that kind of work. Also, if you're doing stuff like what we're doing, this kind of video, it's not really necessary. Okay, if you've got a setup where it's just going to be one camera and you're just going to talk about stuff, and you don't plan on doing any editing with it or doing color grading to it or anything like that, not really going to be necessary, right? Those are the situations where I go, yeah, just shoot in HD, perfectly fine. There's plenty of things that I watch that are shot in or distributed in 720p. I don't know if it's shot in 720p, but sometimes it's 1080p, sometimes it's in 720p. But that kind of content isn't being sold by the production value or anything like that, okay? And then you've got the third tier, which is everything else. It's all of the real professional production stuff that has an extended pipeline for doing editing and color grading and visual effects and all those things. And that includes, in my opinion, if you're doing wedding videography, if you're doing event videography for a fair or for some other thing, it includes interviews that you might do for corporate interviews or for a documentary or anything like that, because the value of being able to crop in is so high that there's no real reason not to have it. Okay, And just as an example, if you're doing a wedding, you're shooting video of a wedding. Let's say your lens is not long enough to really get in there and get that emotion on mom's face when the kiss is done or when an event happens. But being able to crop in all the way in and get that shot, that can be the shot of the whole piece. And if you missed it because you couldn't get in there close enough, your client's not going to be as happy as they could have been. Okay, so that's just an example, and all the other things that we just got done saying about how you can use 4K to help you is relevant in this tier of production. So
I think that the most important thing that people need to take into consideration is, what is your intent? You know, what is the context in which you're creating something? If you're trying to be a professional, you have to think about what it is that you're trying to do for your client. Like, you know, what is it that the end result needs to be? You know, there's a movie that was shot on, you know, in the woods, and it's really hard to tell sometimes what's happening. And the intent of that film was to make it look like a real documentary of people getting lost in the woods and being attacked by a weird witch. It's called The Blair Witch Project.
that's right.
It's a really good example of how their intent and their budget and whatever constraints they were under allowed them to create something that was, whether or not you like it, it made a lot of money and it was very successful, and they were able to achieve what they sought out to do. If you're trying to, you know, make a really polished, professional corporate video and it looks like a handycam footage thing, it's not going to work out very well for you.
Can you really quick, just because you brought up Blair Witch Project, which is an example of how in cinema you can really do whatever it is that you need to do, you do.
Right.
And it doesn't mean it's always going to work in every situation. I can like cinema is, when you're doing like films and all that, like there's some wiggle room, you know, between the different tiers of the different kinds of products that you make. I can understand that. But the really interesting one to me is when you told me how Tim and Eric Awesome Show was it? No, it wasn't Tim and Eric Awesome Show. It was oh my God, what's the show? Check It Out with Dr. Steve Brule.
Yeah, I think they both do the same thing, which is they shoot their footage and then they run it through
what kind of camera did they shoot it on?
I don't remember exactly what kind, but it's.
I thought you said they were red cameras.
They probably shoot
high
on
resolution.
They shoot on high resolution cameras, and then what they do is that they downres it, they put it onto a VHS, and then they run the VHS back through to record it off of the VHS tape. So they're trying to get the VHS low quality look by running it through a couple real filters. So it takes your, you know, whatever your image was, and that's part of the humor is that, and I was going to talk about that.
Okay.
When you're trying to make no, that's fine. When you're right on it. When you're trying to make something that is supposed to be funny, and part of the charm is that you're making it look like a public, you know, cable access show, that's from like, you know, the 90s or whatever. The best way to do that is how they handle it. You know, context has so much to do with like why you create things and how you create things. And you know, for those of you who don't have a lot of money, you can't afford a 4K camera, you can't afford a big, you know, computer to edit this stuff on or whatever, that's fine too. You have to use what you have. But, you know, I just have to stress that, you know, you being successful in doing the things that you do, you know, under budget constraints and all that kind of stuff, or if your content that you're creating, you can get away with shooting, you know, 720 or 1080 and downsampling it from there, or not doing it, or shooting it on a cell phone, whatever it is. A famous YouTuber called Grade A Under A, he was recording on a cell phone his audio, and then he did his animations in MS Paint. I mean, that works for them, but it doesn't work for The Simpsons. Yeah, you know. So
yeah, and then like there's also
it's very important to think about that.
Yeah, there's also Marlon Webb. He does. I think he uses cell phones most of the time for the stuff he does. Like,
is he the Water Malone guy?
Yeah, Water Malone guy. Like that guy
videos.
He has a whole career doing these short, you know, funny videos and I think he started extending them, but he has a whole career doing that. And he, you know, if your content is basically someone who's really funny doing funny things, and that's what you're going to do, then that makes it won't matter. Then you're not going to need
Right.
to, you know, get a map box with a follow focus and get like a super high res camera. Like, that's not going to be necessary in those situations, right? My thing is that there's generally those three different tiers of content that's going to be created, and how you can determine whether or not they're going to need that extra resolution can be determined basically on what they fall in. Obviously, and I've said this a million times, the content you create is always going to be more important than all the other technical stuff. It's always going to be more important than that. If you do everything backwards and you make something your own way with a horrible camera and all that stuff, but it works, who am I or anybody else to tell you that you were wrong to do it the way you did it?
Right.
You know? However, those outliers are usually like, you know, out in here and out in there, and like, it's not always the situation. It to me, I play it safe. It's safe to know that you got that higher resolution, the higher amount of data to do what you might need to make sure that your project came out. Just as an example, it's a lot easier for me to know I got the shot and won't have to go reshoot it again because I framed it a little loose, knowing that I'm going to probably crop it a bit in post, than to be stuck with whatever I shot that day.
Right.
I mean, I know that there's cinematographers who cringe when they hear that someone's going to fix their shot or someone's going to ruin their shots. I totally understand that. I don't look at it that way. I look at it as a producer and I go, I want to make sure that I never have to reshoot anything. I want to make sure that I have enough data where if that's why I'm also, this is going a little off topic from the 4K thing, but that's why I'm really big on shooting raw if you can, over shooting in 8-bit, because there was a cinematographer saying, oh, well, I'm going to start shooting 8-bit and bake in my colors because that way someone can't ruin my stuff. And I look at that and go, I'm the total opposite. I want to know that if I go on set and someone forgets to, you know, white balance it properly, just a very simple thing, but that can happen, especially if you're a one-man shooting crew or one-woman shooting crew, and you're out there trying to do all that. You could forget something simple like that. But if you're shooting in something like RAW or Blackmagic RAW or ProRes RAW or any of these other RAW formats that will allow you to change the white balance in post, why wouldn't you do that? Just to make sure that you can.
Look, just speaking about what you were talking about, those of you who are making product for yourself to enjoy, that's fine. You really don't need anybody to tell you what to do because you're just going to do whatever you want anyway.
Right.
But here's the thing. If you're working on a film, or you're working with clients, or you're working with anybody else, it is usually a collaborative project. And by you being hard-nosed in forcing someone to just accept what you shot, and that was, you just had a small part to play in it, and you're gonna be just hard-nosed about that, I think that you need to rethink that. Because what if everyone else did that? What if the scriptwriter did that, the actor, anyone else who's the editor, anybody else working on this project was just as hard-nosed as you are?
Yeah.
You know, if you're doing something specifically for you, you're making an art piece or, you know, photography that's going to, you know, go up in a, you know, a gallery or something of your work, that's one thing. But when you're working with other people, and when you're working with clients, and when you're working with other collaborators, and you decide that you're just going to do it your own way and, you know, screw everybody else, you're really going to start setting a precedent about how everybody else is going to be acting during that project. And if you're trying to be collaborative, you should not be that hard-nosed about your specific role in the project, because other people might want to have something to say about it. They might want to take something up or down or change something, and you have to be flexible. That's part of what working with other people in this world is all about.
Yep, and I think that would be a great topic for another video like this, to talk about that, because that is something that whenever I looking up what people are talking about with cinematography, and someone starts saying like, oh, they're not. I want to shoot in, like, I've actually seen that. I want to just shoot in HD and get it right in camera so that they can't go and fix my work or ruin my shot. And I go, dude, you're missing the point of working in film or working in a television program or something. All of production, when it comes to that, is a collaborative effort, and if you're the DP, I'm sorry, but you're not in charge of anything, really. The director's in charge. The director could tell you at any point you're fired. The producer at any point can tell you you're fired because you're not playing the game right. So,
well, yeah, like how many? Yeah, I was just gonna say, how many times have you seen somebody else decide to do something and they think it's perfect, and you go, "Wow, that does not look good," or whatever. I mean,
a lot.
Just it's kind of like that golden rule.
A lot. And I'll tell you this: if you're a producer and you're looking at it and you start going, and you can't fix it, you're not going to want to work with that person anymore.
Right.
I've had that happen, and I have to go like, can't trust this person to do the job anymore, and I've got to find someone else.
Can't work with them, can't trust them, can't do it.
Yeah, so I mean, I think we've kind of drilled this to death. Do you have any last things to say about this?
No, I mean, I just want to say, like, I wish that guy all the best with shooting his footage and all that, and this is just a response to his video, and hopefully everyone that's watching this will synthesize the information that they got from him and the information that they got from us and come up with their own ideas about what they think works best for them. And I'd like it if folks want to see us discuss other topics. You can this is your channel. I don't know if you want them to write it in the
in the comment section. I'll probably do something on social. I mean, as far as the organization, I'm still trying to figure that out. But probably switch over to me. I'm still trying to figure out how I want to do some of that stuff. But maybe I'm thinking maybe start with the how I've been doing it, which is getting some feedback from people through the media page on there and just asking questions. Probably do a Patreon. That way it'd be easier to first of all get if we want to do more of this, make it look a little bit better, but it costs money.
Right.
But maybe through Patreon have people provide topics or something like that. But I haven't. My thinking about this is in the moment. I go like, what can I do now? Yeah. That's why. I mean, I did try today to hook up a camera so that at least my picture would look a little bit better, but I just didn't have the stuff on me, and Best Buy didn't have it either because it didn't work. So that's it. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Please let us know if you have any questions, comments, or anything else in the comment section below this video, and we'll catch you next time.
Yeah, make sure to hit subscribe and hit the little bell so that you get the notification.
Smash that like button.
Yeah.
Smash it.
And hit the bell so you get notifications when the new videos come out for this channel.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan, for doing that, because I never do that.
Sure, I watch a lot of YouTube, so.
Yeah, all right. Bye, everybody.
All right, later, folks.